And I'm letting them know that we're good. We are live. And I'm telling our Twitter followers the same thing. Welcome, everybody. This is OOTLE16 Google Hangouts on Air. I am Brooke Lester, and OOTLE16 is the Open Old Testament Learning Event 2016. It's just an introduction to Old Testament course that's happening in an open way during this spring of 2016. You can see it at OOTLE16, OOTLE16.net. And with me today is Dave Garber. Dave, tell us who you really are, where you really work, and what you really do.
All right. Yeah. I teach at the McAfee School of Theology of Mercer University. I am a professor of Old Testament and Hebrew, associate professor there, and I teach a lot on the prophetic literature, the Bible and pop culture, intro Old Testament courses and intro Hebrew courses, and that kind of thing. So that's who I am and what I do.
All right. Because I have so many things I want to ask you about today. This is going to be a very full time.
All right.
I am, again, I'm Brooke Lester. I'm at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois. I teach Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, including biblical, occasionally biblical languages. And I direct digital learning here at Garrett as well. Okay, and so what's going on, just so people know, is so I'm teaching an intro class right now. That's and I'm inviting my students to watch this either while we do it or afterwards. And they are doing the prophets right now. And they're doing actually specifically the latter prophets. And so they're at the end of their unit on the latter prophets. And what they're learning about this week is responses to exile. So they're learning about 2nd Isaiah. It's their first exposure to the priestly writer because they actually haven't done the Pentateuch yet. So they're just beginning to cut their teeth on the priestly writer. They're doing 2nd Isaiah. They're learning, even though it's a prophets unit, I'm throwing Lamentations in there because it's responses to exile. And what else are they getting in terms of Ezekiel? They're getting introduced to Ezekiel as a prophet responding to exile. So that's kind of the grab bag of what they're getting now. What they're going to be cheated out of is the post-exilic period, just because it's a short semester and something had to go.
Yeah, that's very typical.
It really is typical. It makes me, when I think about people like Melody Knowles and others who, their whole thing is about, Ezra and Nehemiah and the post-exilic period. And there's so much going on there. Yeah. I know. It's like when everything really is happening and it's what we don't, what we abandon when we have to sacrifice some coverage. So that's where I'm at. Are you teaching right now? What are you teaching right now?
I'm actually teaching a class. I'm actually teaching a class on the Theology of Exile. So this is very appropriate.
Nice.
And I'm teaching an online class, basically 2 sections of an online class because it got overloaded.
Okay.
Of Foundations in Old Testament. So.
Okay. Wow. 2 sections. What size are your sections?
20 people each.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. There's about 12 in this section that I'm teaching right now. It's a small group.
I would rather have 12. I'm in the middle of grading 40 essays right now, so I'd much rather have 12.
Teaching assistant or no teaching assistant?
I've got a student assistant who marks for grammar and style guide things, but they can't really mark for content the way that I need to do that. So,
yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Add that to all the discussion groups and blog posts and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Quite hairy.
I mean, that's the thing with an online course, isn't it? It's just it's so. I mean, you can get into that thing where it's always happening, and I hear that both. I mean, I talk about that with students who are overwhelmed. Of course, they'll say things like, "Oh, it's really hard for me to be sort of constantly checking in on this course," and I'm like, on the one hand, I'm like, I hope you don't feel like you need to be constantly checking in on this course.
Right.
That's not what I mean to be asking of you. On the other hand, I understand why it feels that way because I myself, as my email inbox fills up every day, as there's assessments to be done sort of in this ongoing way, the online class doesn't always feel like it's something that's just always going on.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. And I have one thing that I found has been helpful is just having a really set rhythm to each week. You post your posts on Thursday, you post your responses by Sunday,
Yeah.
And I try to respond and that kind of thing. But the catch factor in that is that I'm, just because of my schedule, my grading might come, in the middle of a Sunday afternoon or,
Yeah.
So,
no, it's true. Those rhythms are really, really important, though. And the other thing that I'm sort of learning is important to me, although I wouldn't say that I'm good at it yet. But there's something, I don't know, the way it's in my mind is setting up the semester. We're on a semester system, setting up the semester as a party. Like if it's going to be something that's always going on or sort of feels like it's always going on, then it should feel like a party. You know what I mean? It is, okay, everybody's here, and it's like, it's okay to drift in and out of the room. You're not always, you don't have to be the light, you don't have to be the life of the party.
Right.
24/7. But you're drifting in and out. Maybe you get tired of the noise and you go out on the front lawn for a while and drink out of your red Solo cup, and kind of make your way back in where things are happening. You hang out over here. Just an idea that I'm kind of working in my head where it's like, and it is part of that rhythm that you're talking about. Like that is, there's a rhythm of something that is sort of always happening, but that doesn't mean it always has to be at the center of our lives and have the center of be at the center of our attention. Yeah.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. Now, this is something that's been overdue for a long time. Sometimes we write something or we say something or we do something and we think of it as a pretty simple thing, but then it turns out that it takes on a life of its own and comes back to us. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your 6 things. So about 1 million years ago at some point, Dave, in talking about something you were doing, whether it was an adult education session or something in your teaching at your school, but you had a list of 6 things of 6 points about the Bible and about reading its reading and study, and you posted those, and I grabbed onto it, and I've used it a number of times since. I always attribute it to you.
All right.
I always mention that it's yours, but the thing is that I've never heard you talk about these 6 things.
Okay.
I literally, I did what, this is just good sound textual biblical study, for example. It's exactly what we want to be modeling for our students, is that I just took these 6 short bullet points from you, ripped them entirely out of any context that they may ever have been a part of, and immediately pressed them into service for my own agendas, right?
Sure.
My own this is just good reading is what we're talking about here.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So it's exactly what I'm trying to teach my learners to do. So if it's okay, I want to say what these are.
Okay.
And then I want to talk about them with you a little bit. Is that okay?
Sure. That's great. Yeah.
All right, good. So this is what I have in my little note-taking app. I say, this is Dave Garber's list. It's a direct quote from his from a Facebook message at some point. And I'll read them all, and then we can start kind of taking them. There's 6 of them. Number 1, seminary is not Sunday school. And you follow that up with some remarks on Deuteronomy 23 and Isaiah 56 and so on. We'll get back to that. So the seminary is not Sunday school. And number 2, the Bible is for mature audiences only. And we've revisited that recently.
Yeah.
Right? Number 3, the Bible is not a Bible. And you're citing Julia O'Brien there from her blog. And so we'll follow up on that.
Yeah.
Number 4, the Bible is not your Bible, your all caps. Number 5, the Bible is dangerous. And number 6, the Bible is powerful. Now, of course, these 6 points are the kind of thing where I feel like almost any biblical scholar I know is ready at the drop of a hat to grab onto one of these and talk about it with their students, or I don't know, do something with it, in terms of how they want their students to understand the Bible. So, but I've never seen them. But having them in this form and this concise, I was really attracted to. So, should we start at the beginning?
Sure.
Okay.
Let me tell you where that.
Yeah. Where does this come from? What is this about?
So I think this is about. I don't know if you have the date there, but this was several years ago. McAfee did a 30-minute seminary, and so this was through the Atlanta Interfaith Broadcast Network, and so we recorded lectures from Old Testament, New Testament, theology, evangelism, mission, all the different subject areas of the seminary, and had a little 30-minute session, and then it was broadcast on the Atlanta Interfaith Broadcast. So this was kind of what I was trying to do to introduce people to what a biblical studies classroom was like, just to set up the context there.
All right, yeah. So there's this what is seminary about kind of deal. And so starting with number one makes really good sense, right? Seminary is not Sunday school.
Right.
Any of my learners are going to be like, oh yeah, we've heard from Lester on this. We know,
Yeah.
and they probably know what my shtick is on this. For you, let's let you go. For you, why is seminary not Sunday school, and how is seminary? What is Sunday school? And
what
makes seminary different? Yeah.
So Sunday school, and I'm speaking particularly out of my own, tradition and formation, has typically been, in my experience, something that really emphasizes a central Bible truth out of each passage. And it emphasizes some kind of practical application that people can, use this passage in order to understand something about themselves and apply that in their lives the week to come. Now, those things are fine. But what I find in reading through the Old Testament is, one, Sunday school emphasizes only those passages that we are already familiar with, that we don't go to the dark texts, and I've often been called Dr. Dark Text or Darth Garber because I go to those texts that we never read in Sunday school. So that's part of it. But also it really restricts the kind of multivalency of the text, the idea that there might be multiple meanings in a text, and it becomes quite reductionistic. And so when seminary students, often first-year seminary students come in, that may be their only experience. They may not have had a religion major. They may have just come in from, they may be a business person or working in another field, and their only experience of reading the Bible might be in Sunday school and in church. And so they might expect some kind of a devotional type of reading, and we just get way more in depth than in our reading than you would in a typical Sunday school class. So that's kind of what I mean by that.
Yeah. Okay. It is. Yeah. I'm still hung up on Darth Garber.
Yeah.
It's a great one, Dr. Dark Text.
Yeah.
So there's that one aspect, right? Like Sunday school, or I'm thinking of the lectionary. The lectionary is obviously culpable here. That is, there's this habit of using a few texts and sort of recycling them over and over and over again, and drawing an interpretive tradition out of those. I remember there was a blog post I did a long time back when one of these periodic flare-ups in the Society of Biblical Literature about the uneasy alliance that exists in the SBL between those traditions and their institutions that do biblical studies in one way, and those traditions and their institutions that do biblical studies another way. And the way that I'm a part of, right, the game that we play, the thing that we do is this thing where we, when we analyze biblical texts, we base our claims on publicly available evidence using overt lines of reasoning, right? So it's as opposed to giving methodological foundation to private revelation or denominational doctrines, right? So that is, when analyzing a biblical text, we're not going to start with, well, of course we know that God is triune, so when we analyze Genesis 1, this is what we're going to find. Or we know that the Bible is literally or historically true in some way that we can describe, and therefore when we go do archaeology, we will find that the walls fell during the time of a historical Joshua, right? That's one approach to biblical studies, and it's really an in-house Christian theological enterprise, again, of certain traditions, as opposed to this public, secular, ecumenical approach that uses that brings the same questions and the same method, or certainly brings the same methods to biblical studies that you would use in studying other historical literature, which doesn't mean only paying attention to what it meant in the past, because people do read Hemingway or Chaucer or Shakespeare, often with a lot of attention to its consequences for the present and the way that it's read by different communities, and so on. So yeah, that I think it was when Ron Hendel had written a piece in Bible interpretation called "Farewell to SBL," because there'd been one of these horrible sessions where something that looked like just a good normal academic session at SBL turned out to be proselytizing for a particular confessional tradition. And in fact, there were, I guess, a number of Jewish scholars that had attended and found themselves being proselytized. So it was a big deal. And this kind of thing happens from time to time, right? And so it was, so Ron Hendel had written his Farewell to SBL, and I had written a blog post called, I think, A Farewell to SBL Revisited, or something like that, to kind of clarify in my mind, like, how do I talk to students about the difference between Sunday school and biblical studies? Like, what is, and that basic thing of publicly available evidence, overt lines of reasoning. It's not something that is done by a few people who share certain supernaturalistic presuppositions, but in principle, it's available to everybody.
Yeah, I think I'm finding that. I'm grading a paper. It was a critical review of Uriah Kim's paper on More to the Eye Than Meets the Eye. It's about Samson. And I'm finding that a lot of my students are trying to force a theology on some of the scholars that he cites, and even himself, and try to kind of dig some kind of theological truth out of what he's trying to say, when he's writing more from an academic, purely academic, public domain kind of perspective, and is not really making any faith claims in the article at all. So it's, I'm trying to introduce students who come from a theological background to other scholars who have something to say about the biblical text, but don't, like, as you say, don't have the same supernatural presuppositions. So.
Yeah. So, and now you bring in that line about the seminary is not Sunday school, you say a comparison of Deuteronomy 23 and Isaiah 56. So I finally went and looked at those, and these are both texts that have to do with eunuchs and so on. So what's going on there with regard to the Bible not being Sunday school? Why are we looking at two texts that are about dry plants and eunuchs?
I think that was part of the these are the things they don't tell you are in the Bible kind of part of Sunday school. Bible is not Sunday school. In other words, we don't really talk about crushed testicles in Sunday school.
That's right. Deuteronomy 23 is anyone who has a crushed testicle shall not be admitted into like the assembly of Yahweh or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Right. And for, especially kind of a more puritanical vein of Christian Sunday school, we don't talk about those kinds of things because, we don't want to talk about sexual things at all in Sunday school. So that was more of an illustration of something that actually has a great depth of meaning in terms of acceptance and inacceptance into a faith community, but is something we would never touch in Sunday school because it's not, not kosher really in the Sunday school environment. So,
you can follow that trajectory because as you suggest by pairing that with Isaiah 56, right? Isaiah 56. And that's, hey, OOTLE, actually both of our sets of students who are studying the Exile right now, Isaiah 56, part of second Isaiah, right? Isaiah 40 to 55, in its exilic context. And there,
it's 56, so it's the third Isaiah.
Did I say something else? I meant 56.
Yeah, it's third Isaiah, right? So.
Oh, it is third Isaiah,
Who's allowed into the temple now? That's
right, post-exilic context. Presumably, right? We're back in with a rebuilt temple, and then we have these disputes, between which families are running the show and which families are not running the show. You get that sense, don't you, in third Isaiah,
right?
Of a lot of some vitriol for bad leaders, bad shepherds, right? So apparently a group that finds itself marginalized from the centers of power, and there, what's the shall not say? It's a long. Oh, there we go. Don't let the immigrant. Oh, dude, the immigrant.
Right.
How's that for our current context? Don't let the immigrant who has joined with Yahweh say, Yahweh will exclude me from the people. Don't let the eunuch say, I'm just a dry tree. And Yahweh says, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, choose what I desire and remain loyal to my covenant in my temple and courts. I will give them a monument and a name better than sons and daughters, an enduring name. Right. So there's that contrast or tension that though, far from those with a crushed testicle being not admitted to the house of to the house of Yahweh, but now even people who have had both testicles removed, right? As long as they obey the Sabbaths and so on, and even immigrants, right? These presumably dirty like Moabites or Edomites or whoever. This is going to get one of the things that came up with my work in Daniel is that this possibly some argue gets picked up in Daniel 1 simply by virtue of Daniel 1 and the others of his community that are brought into Babylonian exile are brought to the head of the eunuchs. And the question comes up from time to time as to whether Daniel and the others are literally made eunuchs, whether they're castrated.
Right.
The majority of scholars pointing to the idea that head of the eunuchs is arguably a generalized term at this point for sort of a master of the house. And so you would not necessarily have to be a eunuch to be placed under the head of the eunuchs. But some make some pretty strong counter arguments against that. If anyone's interested, Janet Everhart, Everhart, wrote an essay called Hidden Eunuchs of the Bible. That can be, it's released through SBL Press, so it can be found in, say, Theological Library. Yeah. But I was interested in that apparent, what I think is possibly a follow-up to that same conversation in Isaiah 56 that's reaching back possibly or probably to Deuteronomy 23 and then gets picked up again in Daniel 1. Like, there's a real canonical conversation going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's okay. Well, I know we'll have to pick things up. The Bible is for mature persons. I usually paraphrase it as the Bible is for grown-ups. And that's pretty straightforward. You mentioned Gustave Doré's representation of Noah's Ark with drowning people and drowning babies and whatnot all around, as opposed to the typical Sunday school happy, fluffy plush toy, or velvet, what is that thing? The felt board, the felt board version. So it's a terrible story. It's a gross story. God kills every living person, except his family, and that actually we should pay attention to that. So I mean, I found myself also often saying a number of times that the Bible is for grown-ups. The Bible is for mature audiences. The deeper you read, the more you read the Bible, the more you reach that conclusion. Yeah. But you pointed out. What were you telling me when that came up last time, and you pointed something out to me? So,
well, just to think about it in terms of what's going on in popular culture, I often like to kind of pit the reading of the Bible and what's going on in popular culture together. One thing that I've noticed with current Hollywood representations of biblical stories is that they are taking that part of it seriously now. They are doing the mature audiences type of interpretation. Of course, there's tons of critiques that we can bring about the whitewashing of the biblical narrative and all of that kind of thing. But they are saying this is a mature story for mature audiences. Now, when I kind of brought up a counterpoint to my own point, it was through reading some, I think one of Neil Gaiman's posts about children and what they can handle. And he often says that it's really not the children who are disturbed by horror stories or dark narratives, but it's their parents who are more disturbed and protective of the children. Now, I don't have children, so I'm not sure. I'm not going to enter that conversation. But his suggestion was we don't need to protect children from some of the more difficult topics. So that was part of that kind of little conversation.
I mean, I have a child, so I feel more than comfortable speaking authoritatively on behalf of all parents. That's not a problem. No, there is something to that. I liked when you gave me that heads up about Neil Gaiman about what children can. I think he said something forceful like there's no such thing as a children's book or something like that, right? That is that any book ought to be able to be a children's book. And I thought about our own upbringing. I mean, a lot of people would disagree with the way we do it, but this is very much how I was raised. There were certainly some controls put on me as a child with regard to visual media, like multimedia. At that time, it was really just movies and TV. But I was free to read anything I could get my hands on. And I grew up in a family of readers and older readers than me. I was at the bottom end of the kids. And I just read everything that I could, that looked attractive to me in the house. And I was reading stuff that would be considered inappropriate for my age, as long as I can remember. And I've more or less I've pretty much completely raised my own kid the same way. And it's never bothered me, and I've never felt like it's come back to bit me. I think there is some difference between reading and multimedia, because multimedia really assaults all the senses at once. But I think, so I was trying to think, it's like, okay, so if I don't mean children's book, right? If I say the Bible is for grown-ups only, but then that I get caught hoist by my own petard, because actually I'm already living in such a way that says you can't say about any material that it's for mature audiences only, right?
Right.
So if that, then why is the Bible for mature audiences? So I'm not done thinking about it, but I guess what I'm coming around and what I'm trying to think is like, what I'm really saying when I say the Bible is for mature audiences only, maybe something more like a problem with adults insisting that material is actually for children. That is, adults reading mature material as if it were for children is something like it, because we all know the kind of violence that you have to do to a biblical text to make sure that every single biblical text is edifying and nourishing and theologically and Christologically and pneumatologically orthodox and all that. If you're going to put those strictures in order to turn biblical texts into texts that are appropriate for the children's message during your service or for your Sunday school, then we know the kind of violence that you have to do text to kind of make that happen. Yeah.
And there's something to be said for, this idea that we may be overprotecting, especially particularly youth. If we think about going back to the text that you all are getting into, Ezekiel 16 and 23, which are very lurid sexual images and that kind of thing. The first time people usually, at least in my experience, anecdotal experiences, first times that I've heard, people encounter those texts are either they're teenage boys who find them and then giggle about them. I was writing my dissertation and I was writing on chapter 16 and 23 and on Ezekiel, and I was in a Starbucks, and this kid, probably about 18, 19 years old, comes up to me and says, "So what are you doing?" He saw the Hebrew on my screen. I was like, "Oh, great. Here comes a long conversation." And he says, "So what are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm working on my dissertation. I'm working on my doctorate, trying to get it finished." And he's like, "Oh, what are you reading?" And I'm like, "I'm reading the book of Ezekiel." And he said, "Oh, you need to look up Ezekiel 23:20." And I was sitting there writing on the misogynistic language in Ezekiel. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm quite familiar with that verse." And so it's this kind of, by overly protecting, especially, late teens and young adults from this material in Scripture, they come to it with a less mature framework. And so maybe if we kind of thought about, well, how do we introduce a mature reading of the Bible, even in our children's and youth literature and that kind of thing, how would that transform that kind of an encounter?
Yeah.
So
the fact that this person knows immediately about Ezekiel 23:20, right? I heard a reference recently to that, a Simpsons that I barely remember, where Chief Wiggins, I think it is, says something about, to his kid, "Why are you so interested in Daddy's closet of mystery?"
Right.
Yeah. So why are you so interested in these biblical texts that we've told you you're not mature enough to read yet and must never look at?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, mature audiences. Okay. So the Bible, this is super interesting. The Bible is not a Bible. And I've heard you say a little bit about this, or I looked up the Julia O'Brien. That's with an E, Julia O'Brien with Brien, for those who don't know her work or her blog. What do you and Julia mean by that when you say the Bible is not a Bible?
Well, I'm not
the Bible is in lowercase, I think.
Yeah. I'm not going to speak for Julia. I'll just kind of speak for how I understand it. Again, because so many of my students are thinking, okay, how can I use this in my faith community? How can I use this in church life? They're always looking for that practical application. And those terms just bother me to the core, because I think that all the different genres of the Bible demand different responses. I'm not going to practically apply the story of Samson necessarily. And if I do, I might wind up in some kind of misogynistic kind of application that says don't trust women, or don't trust foreign women even. And so I'm not going to practically apply those principles in that way. It becomes an oversimplification. And I think too many of because we take the term Bible, and I've got the Barbecue Bible, right, by Stephen Reichland, and I follow its recipes to a T sometimes, and they come out perfectly. When we talk about a Bible as a kind of an instruction book, God's little instruction book to come out with the exact recipe, I think we're missing the point. Now, there are particular sections of the Bible that we might say, okay, the book of Proverbs has instructional value, but even there, it's dialogical. It's not a recipe. Put this teaspoon of faith in, and that tablespoon of ethical formation in, and then you get a great person. It's how do you apply these proverbs in different situations, or how do you read the proverbs in different situations? So even though it's instructional, it's not this kind of step-by-step guide. It's not this 7 habits of highly effective people or something like that, which a lot of people a lot of my students come into sometimes with that impression. And it's an understandable one, because they're dealing with their congregations and within their own lives about certain ethical dilemmas, or teaching their own children and that kind of thing. So it's understandable that one would want to come to the Bible for that kind of instruction. But as you and I teach, we don't bring up texts simply to have a prescribed result at the end. We bring up texts so we can have a dialogue about those texts, and in the dialogue about the text and with the text, we learn something. So that's kind of where I'm coming at with that statement.
Boy, there's just a lot of layers there, man alive. And some that we haven't even touched on with this business of the Bible not being a Bible. But you say, you say if you talked about the Barbecue Bible, right? Yeah. I think I had the Mac Bible once upon a time. Right. So we know what a Bible is. A Bible is a thing that is full of authoritative information on how to deal with certain things. And if that's the way we think of the Bible, that's when you get things like either like thumbing through it and like putting your finger on a random page to find out what the word of the Bible is for you today. Or even just going, or the bookmark Bible, right? You see, the bookmarks that say, when you're feeling sad, go to this verse. And when you, have a problem with immigrants, go to this verse. And if you, are angry at your family, go to this verse or whatever. And this idea that like there's this index or table of contents that's pointing you to the right part of the Mac Bible, the Barbecue Bible, the Bible, on where to find this stuff. And as you say, almost more often than not, it may be that you go through the Bible and you say, oh, well, this is the part of the Bible that tells me how to deal with foreign women. See, I'm here in the book of Ezra, and it's telling me how to deal with foreign women. So, okay, let's expel the foreign women. That's the word of the text for me today. That's what the instructions say. It overlooks the idea that is depending on what someone thinks the Bible is, right? Because you say here the Bible is not a Bible, which leaves open, which implies the question, what is the Bible, right? So depending on what someone thinks the Bible is, the idea that you're implying here, Dave, of that sometimes we're going to say no to the Bible, right? Yeah. That is, sometimes what we're going to do is we're going to open the Bible to find out how to deal with something, and it's going to say, okay, well, we're supposed to expel all the foreign women and their children, and we're going to say, yeah, I don't think so. Right. That's not what we're going to do, right? Because for whatever reasons, we have either we're from a tradition that uses multiple sources, not only the Bible, but also tradition and experience and reason, or whatever hermeneutic, right, that we're coming out of. Or, oh, I'm from a, non-biblical background, and why should I do what this thing tells me? Whatever that hermeneutic is. Even where the Bible is prescribing, right, where it is overtly prescribing, sometimes the Bible itself is already saying no, right? My folks just got done with the wisdom literature, where Proverbs is stating in pretty categorical terms that the world is of such a kind, and that God has made the world and deals with the world in certain ways concerning who is righteous and who is wicked and what happens to these folks. And the book of Job and Ecclesiastes are right there in the mix, saying, with wearing T-shirts that say, I think you'll find it's a little more complicated than that, right? Than these prescriptions suggest. And then there's also the layer, just when you talk about the way you're talking about reading the Bible, and there's a really fundamental change in thinking here, a change in perception or a change in plan, where why should I assume that I'm going to the Bible looking for answers, right? So who told you, whoever you are, reader X, who told you that that's what the Bible is and that's what it's for? Who told you authoritatively that the Bible is where you go to find answers to things? And then what are you going to do about the fact that what I'm asking you to do for, say, 12 weeks in my class is to look not for answers in the Bible, but to look for problems, to look for questions. You are actually supposed to look for trouble. Remember that thing that, like, your pastor and your Sunday school teacher and your mom and your second grade teacher and the principal and everyone always told you not to do? Looking for trouble? Yeah. I'm going to be assessing you in part on how willing you are and successful you are in looking for trouble. Right. That's a big about face. That's a huge 180-degree turn for some folks in terms of orienting themselves, I think, to what we're actually asking them to do, when they come in. Yeah, definitely. Troublemakers. That's right. I love troublemakers as long as they don't make trouble for me specifically, right? I like go into the Bible and look for trouble, but as long as you don't gore my oxen, then we're gonna get along just fine. Okay, so seminary is not Sunday school. The Bible is for mature audiences. The Bible is not a Bible. Number 4, the Bible is not your Bible. This is pretty straightforward. Right? Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. The history and culture of those who produced the text. But what do you mean when you say the Bible is not your Bible? Well, it's partially about the history and culture of those who produced the text. I'll interrupt briefly. I have to ask you a question. Sure. What I'm always reminded of when I see that, and it's not the same thing, but it always makes me laugh, is an early church professor that I had as a master's student who was overheard to say, he was talking about theology and liturgy, and he said, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. It is not little, nor is it yours." And there's that point at, nor is it yours, that I'm always reminded of when I see your line here about the Bible, it is not your Bible. So what do you mean when you say it's not your Bible? So I mean that on kind of 2 levels. One, of course, it's produced from an ancient Near Eastern context with a people group who has usually been suffering under some kind of oppression from all of the different empires that are kind of trying to get that important piece of land and trade routes and all of those kinds of things. So I mean to say that when we read the text, we are entering into that cross-cultural exchange. At the same time, and I think it's because of the increasing diversity of our student body at McAfee, we have so many different ways of reading the Bible represented among our students and among our faculty that sometimes, what one person, hears in suburbia in a big church, wealthy church, and what someone hears in the inner city
the ways that they read the Bible are totally different. And so part of that is about social location and how we come with different perspectives and different kinds of ideas about the Bible just because we have different life experiences. And so negotiating that conversation while also trying to negotiate the conversation of, yeah, but it's really about the ancient people is both challenging and exciting. It's so that's kind of why I was getting at with that.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because we talk about there's something I'm aware of, but I think I haven't found my pattern for talking about it yet. Is with learners is, I mean, we talk about the meant means distinction, right? There's what the Bible probably meant to its likely author for the community to whom he likely wrote it, like what it meant when it was written for the person who wrote it, what it probably, as best as we can tell. So that basic literary historical task, yeah. And then there's like this gulf. We talk about that, the gulf between that meaning and what it means. And when we talk about what it means, my usual language for that is the range of possible meanings that the text may hold for later reading communities, right? Or for later readers. And of course, I do talk about how those meanings are going to be different for different folks, right? Sort of like an analogy of, you know, music is not the black marks on the white page. Music is what happens when somebody plays the black marks on the white page and interprets them, you know, by playing them with an instrument or their voice or whatever. And that performance is going to be different for different musicians because every musician is an interpreter of the black marks on the white page. And folks get that. What's interesting me in the way you talk about the Bible is not your Bible is that we're screwed both times. You know, it's like the Bible is not mine because it meant something else to the person who wrote it. That's one reason that the Bible is not my Bible.
Right.
But even when we go from there to what the Bible means, the Bible is still not my Bible, at least not comprehensively, because the Bible also belongs to every single other reader in their own way. And I do not have control over their interpretations, you know?
Right.
So I have to share, you know, I'm put in a position where I have to, it can't be mine. At most it can be our Bible, at least in that sense. But even then, our is not going to imply necessarily a single community that agrees on a bunch of stuff, but is going to include multiple groups who deeply dispute what the music that we're playing with this thing here.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It just becomes more messy that way, and I get a lot of pushback on how messy I'm making Bible reading, but that's that's not just my pattern or proclivity. It's I think something that is necessary, especially as we try to negotiate some of the problems we have in our own communities. So.
And it needs to be said that like where someone else sees messiness in what we're doing, biblical scholars see job security.
Right.
So yeah. Okay, so number 5, the Bible is dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Hear about abusive interpretation. I think the Bible is already dangerous on some of the above points, but here you're talking about abusive interpretations.
Yeah, you know, Bible used to justify slavery, the Bible used to justify holy war, even in our times. You know, right after 9/11, the tendency to go back to Joshua and reinterpret that right after 9/11 because of the kind of bloodthirstiness of America. So this kind of sense that because the Bible holds so much authority, it can be extremely dangerous if we oversimplify our interpretations. If we and part of it goes back to the Bible not being a Bible, lowercase B-I-B-L-E. If we just simply say this is a recipe book for how we should respond to different actions. Also, you know, just the patriarchy and misogyny in the texts, it's not something we want to necessarily apply, those kinds of things. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward as well. The trick is to balance this point with the next point, which is even though the Bible has been used for these horrible atrocities throughout Christian history especially, the Bible is also powerful in that it is inspired great movements like the Civil Rights Movement, like Martin Luther King Jr.'s movement, those kinds of things. So how do we tap into that power while recognizing the danger of oversimplifying our interpretations, especially for, again, I'm teaching in a seminary context. If I'm trying to train Christian leaders and ministers, how do we balance that is kind of what I'm getting at with those last 2 points. Recognizing, it can be dangerous and don't oversimplify, but it can also be very, very powerful in how you want to kind of shape your understanding of the gospel and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I never thought about it in this imagery before, but the way you talk about it, it's like, if in any faith, especially, where is the Bible usually talked about in these ways? It's usually in faith contexts rather than, in overtly or, secular environments. But anywhere that the Bible is being sort of talked about and interpreted by folks who consider it to be authoritative in some way, whatever that is, if folks are treating it glibly or easily or as a weapon or a tool that is easily and safely handled, I think we all kind of want to back away slowly, or maybe not so slowly, because there's going to be some bad stuff going on there. What we really want to see is folks treating the Bible as if like they have to decide whether to cut the green wire or the blue wire, and they really want to be sure which wire they cut. That's more the imagery I want to have in mind when people are interpreting the Bible, because it's powerful, right? We already know that it's gunpowder. Right, we already know that it's an explosive device. We already know that that's the case, and so treating it accordingly is definitely something to keep in mind. Yeah. All right, and but so the last one, you say the Bible is dangerous. Number 5, then you go on to number 6, say the Bible is powerful. Right. You're kind of turning it here, aren't you? Right, from because dynamite is already powerful, right? Dynamite is dangerous because it's powerful. But what are you getting at when you say that?
That's where I'm getting at, that it certainly has been and can continue to be powerful in a positive way.
Yeah.
So those who wanted to abolish slavery were also inspired by the Bible, in as much as those who were slave owners were inspired by the Bible. So it's this kind of this mix, and we see. I think that's part of why we see the multivalency in the text. And part of the problem is that we see a voice that we recognize and we want to grab onto that voice. That perspective is how we're going to shape our ethic, or how we're going to shape our response to a particular situation. And we don't recognize that when we do that, we are ignoring all these other voices within the text, and perhaps even voices within the minor text that we're looking at, or the small piece of text that we're looking at. And I think this can be, if we're thinking about kind of our divided culture and that kind of thing, it's just as easy for a progressive to do that as it is for a conservative to do that. And so this, when the Bible is so often used in our kind of popular decision making, even at the secular level, because either it's being used to persuade people of faith, or used to kind of as this kind of Christian nationalism. When we see that kind of happening, we need to learn how to be careful, and at one not kind of feel like we can't be inspired by the text to do good things, but also realize that the danger of some of the other texts that some of our opponents, in whatever issue it is, might feel is authoritative for them. And you can go down a list of different hot button topics, same-sex marriage, nationalism, economic, poverty issues, all of those things, and you'll see different people using the text to kind of support their own view, as opposed to the other, the counterpoint. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, is saying it's dangerous, but it's powerful. Don't forget that it's got the power to inspire and to shape, and at the same time, it can shape us in very very poor ways. It's part of, if you've ever done the Enneagram studies, personality studies, those kinds of things, I'm a 6 on the Enneagram, so I'm a loyal skeptic. So I'm constantly questioning the Bible and saying no to the Bible and saying yes sometimes to different texts, but I'm always holding, because of my own tradition, I'm always holding it as a dialogue partner in faith formation, moral formation, those kinds of things. So how do I negotiate those two sides of my own personality? And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at with my students, is that it's okay to question. We need to question. We need to see what questions are in the text itself and how the text is questioning us. At the same time, we need to be open to where this kind of meaning making might shape us. I don't know if that made any sense at all, but
no, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, okay, that makes me want to transition a little bit in the time that we have. When you talk about the potential that the Bible has for a liberating word, that is powerful to liberate and not only to oppress. So I'm thinking of something that my students are working on right now that I'm really proud of them about. I'm going to brag on it a little bit because I think it's an example of what you're talking about. That'll also give you a few minutes while I'm talking to think about, is there anything going on in your current class on the Exile that has your attention, or something that just anything that happens or is happening in your in your class that has your attention and that interests you and that you like. Because what my learners are doing now is, during this unit on the latter prophets, I asked them to, and I've used this assignment once before in this form, is I asked them to analyze Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail as prophecy. Prophecy in the ancient Near Eastern sense, right? So they're going off and learning about prophecy and what prophecy means in the ancient Israel and the ancient world, that it's not just a matter of like predicting things. It's not, like Nostradamus, and this. So what are the sort of activities and genres and characteristics of prophecy, and then to analyze Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. And for those who aren't familiar, just briefly, this is when there were getting ready to be a number of these protests, civil rights protests back in Birmingham, and 8 white moderates, 7 Christian and 1 Jewish, had written to Martin Luther King, urging him to pull back the protests and saying that, this is just going to incite the segregationists and the even further. It's going to just exacerbate racism, and that what we need to be doing is pulling back on this confrontational activity of these protests. And Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail is a response to those 8 white moderates. And he talks about the problem of the moderates, and he talks about that in some ways the moderates are more his opponents even than the dyed-in-the-wool overt racists, because of reasons. So they've been working on that for about 3 weeks. And what happens smack in the middle of their activity, in the second of their 3 weeks of doing this, but the Trump rally in Chicago, right? And enough protesters show up that, for whatever reason, whether because Trump thought that it wasn't going to go his way, or because he had this, kind of Machiavellian idea that this is a perfect opportunity to start like playing the victim. I mean, a lot of people have talked about all these things that could be going on there. But what is sure is that in the week that followed that Saturday, there were a number of these voices saying, way to go, anti-Trump protesters. Now you're just going to have riled up even more votes for Trump, even more, you're very much in the tone of these moderates who had written to Martin Luther King, eliciting his letter from a Birmingham jail. So I was like, you just can't plan this stuff, that this would happen at exactly the same time. And it's just a night for me. I was really excited that, like, it's like carrying it over one stage further. That is, what I was trying to do is to illustrate to my students, or let them learn through this activity, the ways in which, one way of appropriating an ancient text in a modern, in a more modern whatever. I'm not finding the words. I guess I'm getting tired. But then that thing of that text, that 68 or text or so, having relevance now today, right? And finding that. So then by extension, we ought to be able to find that prophecy as an ancient Near Eastern, ancient Israel mode of discourse and set of character activities does continue to have that relevance, and especially with prophecy, because just that thing where we always think that prophecy, especially in a civil rights Martin Luther King vein, really means just reading Amos 5 over and over again. Let justice roll down, like waters. But this kind of more comprehensive, more engaged way of finding fresh ways of drawing on prophecy in response to a situation like the one we had in Chicago. Well, I'm not 100% sure where I'm going on that, but I'm very happy that it played out that way, and I'm excited about what can be happening in the class as a result.
Yeah, you'd asked about how kind of this relates to my class on Exile, and I think that kind of one of the most fulfilling or one of the most meaningful processes in my class is that each of the learners in the class has a centering activity where they are responsible for the texts of the day, whether that be Jeremiah or Lamentations or 2nd Isaiah or Ezekiel, but they're also responsible for a modern day community of exile. So we've had people connect the biblical text and the ancient situation of exile to the Syrian refugee crisis, to the to kind of the exile of mental illness. So all of these are kind of operating analogically, obviously, but it's been really rewarding to kind of see how they're looking beyond their own communities to see where exile is happening, forced migration, the immigration issues in the United States, those kinds of things. And then to ask about what the text reveals about the pain of going through that exile, and perhaps then move towards the hope. If you're to ask me kind of what the pattern is right now, I talked to one of my former students who took this class 3 or 4 years ago, and he said it was a great class, but we were always sad at the end. And it's true. It's these texts in Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Lamentations especially are very, it's very hard work to read the exilic material. And part of the reason why it's even harder in my class is because I am pushing against the rush to a Christological interpretation and the rush to hope, because I'm trying to counterbalance what we already experience in perhaps many Christian traditions, which is that rush to hope. And at the same time, I feel guilty at the end of every class because we're leaving depressed, but in a good way. We're leaving sad, but having kind of the recognition that we really do need to wrestle with the text. So with Lamentations, for example, for that whole the day that we spent on Lamentations, I purposefully tried not to really talk too much about Lamentations 3. I wanted to kind of say, okay, we know that there is hope in there, and that there's hope in the center of the book, but we really do need to talk about chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5 before we really recognize that hope. Actually, we just had we had the self-preaching lectures just this week, and Otis Moss III came and talked about Blue Note preaching, and finding the trouble in the text before moving to the hope, and was really critical of current preaching traditions that move towards the hope without dealing with the pain. And so that's one of the things that's really difficult about a course on exile. Hopefully we're going to turn a corner. We're going to get to the hopeful chapters in Ezekiel here in a little bit, and we'll get to 2nd Isaiah, which is even more positive, if you will, even though it's still got some tough material in there too.
No, I hear that.
So
That's good. I like, the not rushing, right? Not rushing
right.
to a Christological move, not rushing to hope. Probably a lot of my learners, it'll resonate. They'll make a connection back to when we were doing the lament psalms and talking about Walter Brueggemann's essay, "The Costly Loss of Lament," and some other works that talk about the unfortunate habit in our religious culture, and especially in Christian Protestant tradition, to avoid lament and complaint in liturgy, and basically to always think of liturgy, especially the Sunday, the major Sunday service, as really being all about praise, 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 praise.
Right.
And then the way that that horrible thing, that just very hard thing to watch when someone is being crushed by whatever experiences are going on in their life. And even if you try to get them talking about it, almost all that come out of their mouth is, "Oh, but I'm still blessed because whatever," or "Oh, yeah. And that somewhere along the way we're being told not to dwell in the pain and not to sit with pain and complaint and anger, including anger against God, but to rush to resolution, to rush to joy, to really prematurely. Okay, so we're at time. I'll tell you what I wanted to get to that we won't, and so we'll put a pin in it. We'll put a pin in it for next time. And this is more like a guild thing or kind of a higher education thing. But you do stuff. That's not. I'm going to get you in trouble here. We should be careful about who watches this at both of our institutions. You do stuff that's not directly work related from time to time, Dave Garber.
From time to time, yeah.
I see that you do. You like
on off work hours.
On off work hour. Wait. On what kind of hours? I'm not.
I said, we don't have children, so yeah.
I'm not trying to. I understand what that means, right? I mean, so what I'm pointing out here is that so you like to cook.
Yes.
I see you cooking, and I see you talking about your cooking. It always looks really, really good. And you do photography also, right? You like to do photography. I also do things. One of my big things that I do is my martial arts. It's a big part. It's a big part of my life. It's an important part of my life. It's something I share with my son, and the community that I'm a part of in doing martial arts is also very important to me. So it's and just I don't know if we do, Dave. I don't know when we stop talking about ourselves as junior faculty and start transitioning to mid-career faculty, but I don't think we're there yet. But sure enough, I mean, like junior faculty, these are when people have conversations like, if I don't respond to emails at like 5:30 in the morning, are people going to notice that I sleep late? Or if I don't come into my office every single day, are people going to walk by and notice that, like, I might not be in my office? These are the kinds of questions junior faculty often ask one another, because we are frequently in our institutions trying to discern this culture of how okay is it that I am occasionally discerned doing something besides publishing, right? Or working directly on my classes or doing service work. So we won't get into that now. But now that's in your ear, and as opportunity presents itself at a later date, you want to dig into that a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Good. Dave, I'm so glad that you decided to join me and do this. It's a lot of fun for me. I hope it's useful to my students and yours and whoever ends up watching this stuff later on. So again, I'm Brooke Lester. I'm at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary, and this was in service to OOTLE16, the Open Old Testament Learning Event 2016 at OOTLE16.net. And this has been Dr. Dark Text, Garth Garber, Dave Garber, who is at McAfee
School of Theology at Mercer University.
McAfee School of Theology at Mercer University, where you teach Old Testament Hebrew Bible and also Hebrew. You said, right? You teach Hebrew.
Yes.
You teach Hebrew, yeah. Good. Dave, hang on. I'll say goodbye to you after we go off air.
All right.
But let me just thank you one more time for coming around.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right.